I'm Gulfport Mayor Sam Henderson. We're gathered here today virtually to remember and honor all the lives lost in the attacks on September 11th, 2001. Nearly 3,000 lives were taken from us. We honor the courage of those who put themselves in harm's way to save people they never knew. We come together in gratitude and strength as we near the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. We must never forget the bravery, the sacrifice, and the lives that were lost. The single largest loss of life resulting from a foreign attack on American soil. We all remember that day in history, September 11th, 2001, a day where the world seemed to stand still. Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
Where was I on 9/11? Well, that morning I was on my way to work, like every morning, on the BQE, which is the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. Driving along the waterfront in Brooklyn, right across the river there is the skyline of downtown Manhattan. As I was stuck in traffic like usual, crawling along, looked across the water and I could see the World Trade Centers, and one building had a ton of smoke pouring out of it. It's like, oh man, what the heck going on there? Even though the traffic was slow, everybody was even slowing up more to take a look at what was going on. And right away, turned the radio to the news, and the report was that there seems to be a plane or some kind of small plane or large plane, we don't know, that went into the World Trade Center. We'll keep you informed. As I'm listening to this, I'm looking at the smoke, and then from the corner of my left eye, I could see a commercial airline flying low coming over Jersey, and I'm staring at it. I'm like, this is not right. There's something going on here. And I just watched that plane go straight into the second building. And at that moment, I just knew the world will change forever. I didn't know how much, but for the next couple of weeks, into the months, we witnessed so many things. The first couple of days going down there and trying to find survivors, it was heartbreaking to watch firefighters who sat there on the side after working 14, 18, 20 hours straight with no sleep and not even going home, laying in the rubble to catch a nap, just trying to find their brothers, and nothing. The triages were set up everywhere, all these volunteers from all the hospitals, and not one person was coming in. It was nobody survived. As time goes on, you find out more and more people who were down there and just started getting sick. Unfortunately, I was one of them. There are programs out there that helped us, but this is just really hard to talk about. My wife begged me to do this because otherwise I wouldn't sit here and say anything. But it does hurt, and I just hope people remember that day. Don't forget what happened. I don't want to put a blame on one particular set of people or anything, but there's evil in the world. There's a lot of evil. I wish we could do away with it. Hopefully one day we can. That's all I have to say. Thank you, everyone.
September 11th, I was in the gymnasium of a school on my street. It was primary voting day, and I was online to vote. And then all of a sudden there was an announcement over the loudspeaker system that the trade tower had just been hit by an airplane and voting is closed. And there were plenty of people in there, and we kind of all ran out in shock and screaming, and Second Avenue was right nearby, and there was a direct vision to the trade towers. And as we got out there, it probably was 40 or 50 of us, the second plane hit. It was like a movie, a very bad movie. I mean, somehow living in New York all those years, I always felt that New York City was a mark, because half the time I'd travel and I wouldn't even tell people I came from New York City. I would say New Jersey, or because if I said New York City, they would take 2 steps back. People hated New York, and maybe they were jealous. I don't know. So here was the first horror that we had ever seen, the United States on our territory. I mean, in terms of history, I only think about the Civil War, where maybe Americans fought Americans, or the French and Indian War up near the border of Canada. We were finally attacked by the terrorists.
I lived and worked within a mile of the White House. I was the executive officer of Interaction, a coalition of 165 international humanitarian development and disaster response organizations. We always had the TV on to see what was happening on Capitol Hill. And at the same time, my father was the Deputy Undersecretary for USDA on the Mall, and my mother was retired and residing in a condo between Ronald Reagan International and the Pentagon. As soon as the first plane hit, James Bishop was having a humanitarian committee meeting of heads from all over the world for disaster response. He was the last person out of the embassy in Somalia. He immediately took charge and made sure that we set up teams of people because everybody needed to depart the city because we were so close and there was no reliable information on what was happening. We heard bombs were going off at the State Department, other planes were coming in. So we didn't want anybody to be on the metro. So that was a big thing. As the executive officer, I made sure everybody was carpooled, nobody was on a metro, and then I was the last one to lock up and walk to my condo, which was blocks away. And I just remember the feeling of walking against the tide. Everybody was departing the city, and I'm just kind of going through the city, not knowing what's happening with my father, my mother, my brother, and his family were in Manhattan. And I had never seen the likes of it before. And it turned out to be one of the three big pillars and reasons for why I moved to Gulfport. I didn't want to be that anonymous being anymore. I wanted to feel part of a community again. I couldn't believe something this horrific was happening around me and I was powerless to do anything about it. It turned out that my father, instead of staying on the side of the Potomac, wanted to be there to take care of my mom. And there was a point at one time I was watching someone doing a report right at Ronald Reagan, and a plane was coming in and they just ducked onto the floor. And all I could think of is, I pray my mother just got out of that building because it is just way too close. And it never left me. When the Pentagon went up, my parents' condo was right there, and it was just a horrific day all around. And again, we'll never forget it. I think up until about 2 years ago, it was my penance every year to watch that entire broadcast from start to finish, because I felt I needed to respect those lives that were lost that day. And I'm just grateful to all of the responders that were there and that lost their lives. And I pray we never see the likes again. And as we say, we'll never forget.
Back then, I was working in media. So I was working for the Journal News newspaper. And I remember I lived it's called Rockland County, which is north of Manhattan. And I was driving on the Tappan Zee Bridge on my way to the Journal News where I worked, which was in Westchester County. And I remember I was on the bridge, and if I looked over to my right, I can see the skyline of Manhattan over the Hudson River. And everybody on the bridge was just stopped. They stopped us. So we were freaking out naturally, because on the news they kept saying, oh, they're going to attack the bridges. They're going to attack the bridges. So we're all yelling out our windows, why are you stopping everybody on the bridge? And as we're looking over, we just see the smoke, and nobody really knew what was going on. And you turned every news channel on the radio and you just kept hearing towers going down, towers are going down. So finally, as we were able to move, we get to the toll booth and they were just passing us through. Then I get to work, and then as soon as I walk in my building, they say, they're going to come after the media, they're going to come after the media. So they told us, stay in your department and then we're going to evacuate you, but we have to do it in increments. So I remember I was calling all of my family and friends that live in Manhattan and work there, and I was asking, what's going on with the phone lines? Everything was busy, you couldn't get through to anybody. And I was nervous because at the time I had family members who worked in the basement level of one of the towers. So I couldn't get through to anyone. It was getting it was panic. And I'm working in the media and I'm thinking, we're supposed to be reporting this, but we couldn't report it because we didn't know what was going on. So then when we were finally able to leave to go back to our homes, I was instructed to just get back home, and the news was just showing the timer on the bottom, World Trade Center going down. I still couldn't get through to any of my friends or family. So then I was asked to volunteer for the Salvation Army to go down to Ground Zero and help out. So went down there and got to see everything firsthand, and it was a lot. It was seeing it and being right in the middle of it and having the smoke and the dust and the paperwork and everything just touching you. But knowing that we were helping the first responders was wonderful, and we were all coming together as New Yorkers, and it was just this great bonding experience. Then I was asked to actually go shoot footage for the Salvation Army. So we were the only media allowed down at Ground Zero. They weren't allowing anybody in from the broadcasting networks. And so we went down there and we got a lot of footage, and we were using it for the Salvation Army to show all of the work that we were doing. And while we were down there, we were seeing some really horrible things. And so I still have a lot of that footage, and I try not to look back at it, but it's definitely in my mind.
On September 11th, 2001, I lived in Brooklyn, New York, and it was very close to Manhattan. I worked in Manhattan. So I left my house in the morning, and it was an absolutely beautiful day. Sky was blue. It was a gorgeous day. Took the express bus into Manhattan, and the first stop was, once we got into Manhattan, we went through a tunnel, got into Manhattan. The first stop was the World Trade Center, and half the bus emptied off. And when I sat down in my seat again, I turned to the woman next to me and I said, "It must be so nice to work downtown." The bus kept going, went around the corner, stopped at a light, maybe 3 blocks from the Trade Center, and a woman came banging on the door like a lunatic, screaming, and the bus driver opened the door, and this woman was so hysterical, you couldn't even understand what she was saying. But she was telling the bus driver not to wait for the light, to just go, just go, just go. She kept saying, "We have to get out of here. Didn't you see what happened?" But none of us saw anything. We were sitting on a bus. It was nice and air conditioned. And she said a plane hit the World Trade Center. And nobody really believed her because that's insane. As the bus waited for the light and she was yelling at the bus driver not to wait, when the light changed, he inched up a little bit so we could see the Trade Center. And we were so close to it, we had to all bend down to look out the window to see the top. And sure enough, the Trade Center was on fire. Couldn't really tell that there was a plane in there, but there was definitely a fire. So at that time, many years ago, in 2001, people had radios with headphones. And when you took the headphone out, you could hear the radio. It had a speaker, so everybody could hear it. And the news was on, and they were saying it was terror-related. And the same woman that I said it must be so nice to work downtown, I said to her, "Why does the media do this? They sensationalize everything, and it's just, why don't they just wait till they have all their facts?" But the news continued on, and about 10 minutes later, I was in Midtown, and I was so happy to get off that bus because I thought I was just going to go on with my day in the law firm and just go on with my day. It's as a normal day. My husband was trying to call me, couldn't get through on cell phones. He was on the Brooklyn side of the East River, and I was on the Manhattan side. When he finally was able to when I got to my desk in my office, he was able to get to me on a landline, and he was telling me what was going on. He was stopped in traffic. The highway that he takes to work was a parking lot. It was just a parking lot. Nobody could move. Everybody was watching this plane and this tower that was on fire. And we talked about it a little bit. You know, it couldn't be terror related. I don't know why they're saying that. It just didn't make any sense. And we hung up. 2 minutes later, he called me back and he said, "Regina, I just watched the second plane fly into the tower, the South Tower." And I said, "Robert, listen to what you just said." He said, "Regina, I'm telling you, it was a regular commercial airliner. He was flying low. He made the turn, tilted, and went straight through the South Tower. I watched it." And all I could say was, "Robert, this is not making any sense. I don't know what you saw, but what you're saying makes no sense at all. It just couldn't be." Hung up the phone, and I went into the conference room, and everybody was sitting there glued to a little tiny television. and nobody even could say a word. He just couldn't say a word. I watched the replay of what my husband just told me, and it became real. It just became real. So I totally went numb, and I looked for anything to do to keep myself busy so that I didn't have to think. I cleaned, I made coffee, I did whatever I could do to just not have to think about the reality that was going on. But this was it. It was real. There was no getting away from it. Not long after that, all of Manhattan was on lockdown. So there was no way for me to get home. The trains were stopped. The bridges and tunnels were closed. There was just no way to get home. And I would have to pass the World Trade Center to get back to my house, or in the direction of my house. So I just sat there. My husband told me, just stay put, don't go anyplace. I got in touch with my parents. My father was the project accountant for Tishman Construction Company. He was the project manager on the World Trade Center job when it was put up in 1972. And he was just, you couldn't console him. He was so upset. But he also said, just stay where you are. Don't move. I was on the 27th floor. We were not far from Grand Central Station and the Empire State Building and St. Patrick's Cathedral and Times Square and other targets. But, you know, we didn't know if we were better off inside the building or outside it. And we just had to stay put and wait. They didn't start the trains again until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, at which time I got on the train and went to my husband's job, and we drove home together. And after I walked into my front yard, my kids came out when they heard the car, and we just all hugged, and everything after that was a blur. I don't even know what I did the rest of that day. I have no idea. The days afterward, it was an internal shaking. It was something that you can't describe unless you've been through something really awful right in front of your face. Took a week or so to get, and when the smell in the air outside was absolutely disgusting. It was awful. My husband kept going with his friends to volunteer. They had so many, the good part was there were so many people coming in to volunteer to help that it became chaotic, and Mayor Giuliani had to stop some of the volunteers because they weren't sure what the chain of commands were, and they weren't following protocol. So he only had people with badges who were coming to volunteer, who knew what to do. So my husband went, and he brought a couple of friends with him, and then they would come back to my house, and they didn't even bring their clothes inside. They took their shoes off outside. They described what they were stepping on as not just construction dust and ash, but squishy, almost like it was probably human remains, because it was. And that thought was just awful. It's just a horrible thought. When it came time to go back to work, again, I got on the express bus. We got to the tunnel that takes you into Manhattan, and there were state troopers there with the high boots getting on each bus and looking everybody in the eye, looking underneath the bus, making sure there were no explosives, asking people, did anybody hand you anything to get on this before you got on this bus? It was such this was America. It was just unbelievable. We finally got cleared to go through the tunnel, and when we came out on the other side in Manhattan, there was Battery Park, which was a gorgeous, gorgeous park, and it was turned into a military zone. There were army tents. There were men in fatigues with the big high boots and these gigantic rifles guarding all the entrances to the park. This was a park in Manhattan. It was just unbelievable. It was just unbelievable. I loved my job. But I really didn't stay there too much longer because I just needed to be closer to my family. It was just the worst experience of my life, and I will never forget it. And my husband has an even worse story to tell than mine. Just don't forget, never forget. And never forget how afterwards we were able to come together. Just put love out there, because that's what we need. We need to come together. We need to be Americans. We need to end racism. We just need to be.
On September 11th of 2001, I was in North County driving a vehicle to a freelance assignment. And then on the way back, as I was heading towards my work, which was at a full-time work at a newspaper, daily newspaper in town, I heard on the radio that one of the Twin Towers had been struck by a plane. And at first I thought that the radio disc jockey was playing a very bad joke. And but then I recognized a shake in his voice, and I realized that, oh, that is not fake. So I started to drive a little faster to get to work faster, because as a daily journalist, I knew I was going to be playing a role in a team covering the story. At the time, the paper I was working for was considered one of the 10 best papers in the country, so we were definitely going to be covering the story. And in fact, the president had been speaking at a grade school in the general area of our circulation, so I knew that that was going to be something that one or more of our staff was going to be at. In any event, I rushed to the paper. When I got into my office, and in my role as the technology training editor, there was already some buzz going on about how people would be split up into teams doing different things for coverage, and realized that at a daily newspaper, unlike in the general public, even now with social media, we had unfettered access to incoming news. Things were streaming in narratively. Things were streaming in with pictures, audio, and so forth. Plus, it was the early days of the web, before social media had really taken hold. And so we did have some information coming in that way. And that was my main focus, was to go on the web and find different things. And early on, while we had all the TVs tuned to different stations and we were being inundated with information, I was finding things that people were posting, just people, not journalists, not first responders, because they were busy, but people in the area of Manhattan where this happened. They were posting videos, they were posting audio, they were typing in their impressions. So people who were on the front lines that were witnesses to this event were the people that I was paying the most attention to. So it's always important to me as a journalist to get the perspective, the facts from the people who are closest to whatever is happening. And in the words that were being considered for headlines that day, that wound up in print that day on special editions, or the next day when most papers were publishing basically their entire front pages covering this event, some of the key words that came across were the words evil, terror, attacked, war to our shores, the word war. Another paper published a great big headline, full width, that said bastards. Some others followed that. Other headlines included the word outrage. One of the headlines that really struck with me, and I'll tell you why, is a phrase. And the headline was, "A New Day of Infamy." Now, words are the way I make my living. And they can be in headlines, they can be in photo captions, they can be in stories, they can be spoken. One of the things that struck me the most that day in that major newsroom was how silent all the different sections of the newsroom were. People did not know. People who were experts in words did not know how to describe what they were seeing, because every 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, there was something new that we had not expected that made it more horrific. And we just didn't know how to describe any of this. And as a daily newspaper, we had to put something out that day as a special edition. We had to put something out the next day. We had to put everything in context and try to keep it as not as sensational as some people were doing. The paper I was at was very conservative. So one of the things that I did to try and add perspective to what I was seeing and experiencing with all the news, with all the facts coming in, was I thought, okay, I need to talk to somebody who experienced the last mega thing that happened to this country, when the soil of our country was invaded by a foreign entity. And that was, of course, when some bombing happened over in Pearl Harbor. So what I did was I got on the phone to my mom. She was born in 1919, and on the day of 9/11, she was 82 years old. And when I got her on the phone, I said, so what is your impression of what's going on? And she hesitated only to take a breath. And then she said to me, the world has changed forever. So let me just put this on. This is my hat that symbolizes journalism. I'll put my notes down, and I'm going to put this up because I will always remember